What I'm about to tell you happened about a year ago, but it's haunted me ever since. Even now, I live in fear of what could still happen to me. When I turned 23, I finally managed to leave my parents' house and rent a place of my own. Despite the financial struggles and occasional loneliness, the freedom and privacy of that space were everything I had ever wanted. However, after losing my job in an accident, I found myself desperate, needing to find someone to share the house with, to help cover the expenses. That's when Claire Taylor showed up, a young woman who seemed to be in the final stages of her college studies. Her appearance was strange. She was unusually small, like her body had stopped growing, while her face hinted at something older, something worn and knowing. What unsettled me most about her was how she looked like she could be 9 and 45 at the same time. If someone had told me she was either age, I might have believed it without question. I'd never encountered anyone quite like that before. Still, she was friendly, and she agreed to all my conditions almost too eagerly, without a single question, her tone somehow urgent. The first few weeks of living together were peaceful, even though Claire's presence made me feel an inexplicable unease. There was something unsettling about the way she would watch me, with a look that made my skin crawl, like she was trying to figure something out about me. Sometimes, late at night, she'd appear at my door, inviting me to watch movies with her. She was insistent, ignoring my polite refusals again and again. One sleepless night, I finally gave in. She suggested a movie I'd never heard of before. Ratter, a disturbing thriller about invasion of privacy and obsession. As the movie progressed and my discomfort grew, I couldn't help but glance over at Claire. Her face had become intense, her eyes riveted to the screen with a dark fascination, as though each scene brought her some twisted satisfaction. I felt a rising tension, a deep-seated sense that Claire wasn't just a roommate. She had a hidden agenda, and I was somehow tangled in her plans. Needing a moment to gather myself, I told her I was going to the kitchen to get a glass of water. But then she shot up, too fast, and told me she'd already seen the movie and that I could keep watching it while she made us some tea. The way she said it, like it wasn't even a question, made my stomach turn. I didn't even drink tea, but her gaze held a quiet force I couldn't ignore. When she returned, she handed me the tea with a wide smile. As I took a sip, I noticed an odd taste, something stale, almost moldy, but I drank it down quickly, just to end the uncomfortable moment under her watchful eyes. After that, everything went dark. The next thing I remember was waking up on the couch the next morning, sunlight streaming through the window and hitting my face. Claire was in the kitchen, busy with something and humming, seeming almost cheerful. My head was throbbing, and when I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face, I noticed that my shirt was on backward. I thought it was strange, but my pounding headache and general feeling of unease kept me from asking her about it. From that point on, things started to change in subtle but eerie ways. My room felt different every time I came back to it, as if someone had been going through my things. But when I looked closely, everything seemed in its place. I set up tiny traps, little things anyone unfamiliar with the room wouldn't notice. But every time I returned with the feeling someone had been there, the traps were undisturbed. Claire always seemed to find a way to slip past my locked door, leaving behind tiny clues of her presence. Small, absurd things made me question my own sanity. The mirror would be wiped clean, almost shining. The keyboard on my computer would be spotless, even between the keys. One night, everything came crashing down. I woke up with the feeling of weight beside me. When I opened my eyes, I saw Claire lying there next to me. A chill ran down my spine, freezing me in place, and I realized I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed, unable even to make a sound. The last thing I remembered was sitting down for dinner. I didn't even remember going to bed. And yet, there she was, lying next to me. I don't know how long I lay there, immobilized, each second stretching into an eternity of pure horror and revulsion. dreading what she might have done, what she was planning. Eventually, she got up and left the room, heading to the bathroom. I forced myself to pretend to be sleeping, barely breathing, hoping she wouldn't notice. When she returned, the bed creaked under her weight as she lay down again, pressing close, clinging to me. My heart pounded so hard I thought she might hear it. I stayed perfectly still, my breaths shallow, battling the nausea and the oppressive sense of dread. Finally, I felt a twinge in my fingers, and, with every ounce of strength I had, managed to reach my phone. I typed out a brief message to my best friend. "I need help. Come through the window." He understood immediately. I'd confided in him about Claire before. He arrived quickly, taking advantage of Claire's absence as she went out to get groceries. He broke the window and got in. He found me in a state of shock, still only partially able to move due to the drugs and trauma. He immediately called the police, and that's when everything came out. She wasn't who I thought she was. Claire Taylor was actually a 43-year-old woman wanted for years for a series of stalking-related crimes. She never returned to the house. She knew, watching the police cars parked outside, that they were there for her. Despite the sense of relief, the dread never fully left me. I can't shake the feeling that she is still watching me, that she is waiting, biding her time, until she can return to finish what she'd started. Sometimes, while I'm walking down the street, I get the sensation of eyes on me, hidden but constant. Other times, I hear noises inside my apartment, noises that send me into immediate, frantic alertness. The worst part? I haven't slept peacefully since, and I'll never rent out a room in that house again. Hey, Horror Spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. My family has had a cabin up near Mount Whitney for as long as I can remember. It's been in the family for generations, passed down like a treasured heirloom. Growing up, I spent countless summers up there, hiking and exploring the trails. My dad, especially, loved that place. He practically knew every inch of it, every trail, every hidden spot. It was like he was part of those mountains, and they were part of him. 2 years ago, my dad got sick, and with all the medical expenses, I thought maybe I could try renovating the cabin to rent it out. It felt like a way to make use of something that had been in the family forever and help cover his treatment costs at the same time. At first, I'd get weekend bookings here and there, and sometimes folks would book for a week or so. Then I got a request from a couple to rent the cabin indefinitely. It seemed perfect. I wouldn't have to manage things constantly, take care of cleaning or maintenance, or even make the trip up there as often. Plus, they paid on time, sometimes even in advance. Everything seemed fine until one day I was flipping through the paper at a cafe and saw a headline that caught my eye. A couple had gone missing in an area close to the cabin. My heart skipped a beat. My first thought was about the couple renting from me. For a second, I felt panic creeping in, but I told myself to stay calm. I decided to read the article more carefully. As I read further, I realized it wasn't the same couple. But as the story unfolded, a shiver crawled up my spine. This disappearance was the 5th one in 4 months. That area always had its share of hikers getting lost, usually people overestimating their skills or underestimating the trails. But this was different. The frequency of these disappearances was unsettling. The article suggested these cases could be due to carelessness on the part of the victims, but something felt off to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just bad luck. I decided to keep an eye on things even though I barely knew the couple staying at the cabin. I'd only met them once when I showed them the place. They seemed a bit odd, sure, but they were polite, easygoing, and didn't ask much of me. Still, there was something about them I couldn't quite put my finger on. Something that left me uneasy. I sent them an email. The cabin was in a spot with poor reception, so I knew calling wouldn't work. A week went by with no response. The uneasy feeling kept growing until finally I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided I had to go check on them myself. Getting there wasn't easy. It's hours of driving, and once you park, you still have a 15-minute hike in, especially in the freezing winter weather we were having. Temperatures were below freezing that time of year. Each passing day only added to my anxiety, until finally, on November 17th, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go check things out myself. The drive to the mountain's base started off smoothly, but once I left the main road, it turned rough and exhausting, with endless sharp turns and uneven stretches. But after some time of this tense journey, I finally made it. I parked, braced myself, and started the last stretch. The cold, lonely 15-minute hike up to the cabin. I hadn't been there in the winter for years, and the scenery was breathtaking, the mountains towering around me, some with snow-covered peaks, all wrapped in an eerie silence. It was beautiful but intimidating, that deep, isolated stillness that almost felt alive. When I finally reached the cabin, the silence felt off. No lights, most of the shutters drawn. It was so quiet that for a moment, I wondered if the couple was using the place as a storage spot, maybe just keeping stuff here and not actually living in it. I knocked on the door, but nothing. No sound. I walked around, peering through the few windows without blinds, hoping to catch a glimpse or hear something. Then I saw it. A small crack in the side door, and through it, I caught sight of a bare foot, barely visible. A rush of panic flooded over me. Someone was in there. I decided to use my spare key. When I opened the door, what I found left me speechless. It wasn't them, the couple renting the place. It was a woman, one of the missing people. I recognized her instantly from the distinct birthmark on her face. She was tied to the wall, eyes dazed, her body weak and shaking. Shock and confusion gripped me, but I quickly snapped into action. She was barely conscious. My heart was racing as I worked to free her from the ropes. When her eyes opened, I let out a sigh of relief. She was alive. I explained quickly that I was there to help, and gently removed the tape from her mouth. The first thing she did was ask for water. I knew we couldn't stay there. We had to leave. There was no signal to call for help, and any minute, someone could come back. As I helped her to her feet, I heard it, a sound in the distance. Footsteps. Someone was coming. I didn't say a word, but she understood. This was our one chance. She was weak, but she could still run, adrenaline likely keeping her going. I led her to a window, and hands shaking, opened it carefully. We slipped out the back of the cabin, moving as quietly as possible, trying not to leave a trace. We ran until she was gasping for breath. The cold was harsh, and I knew our time was limited. I remembered a cave my dad and I had taken shelter in once years ago during a freezing hike. He'd sprained his ankle, and we'd taken cover there to escape the plunging temperatures. The cave wasn't warm, but it was bearable, and it protected us from the wind and snow. It was our only hope. I guided her, my mind racing with fear. We heard a noise in the distance, and that's when I realized we were being hunted. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I saw it. A small opening in the undergrowth, nearly invisible if you didn't know where to look. I prayed they didn't know about it. Once inside, I felt the temperature rise slightly, and a tiny bit of relief settled in. Maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. That night was torture. The cold bit through us, and every sound made the fear grow. But the worst part was the idea that at any moment, those two could find us. At one point, we heard footsteps approaching and held our breath, covering our mouths to muffle any sound. The steps faded, and time dragged on. I spent the night thinking about how we'd get out. The closest village was miles away, doable in a day. But she was too weak for that, especially at the pace we'd need to keep. She understood, nodding without argument. She knew her limits in her condition. I promised I'd return and set off. As I ran, the adrenaline surged through me, and every sound made me look over my shoulder. When I finally reached the village, exhausted and terrified, I called the police. They acted fast, almost like they'd suspected something about that cabin, but hadn't acted. They found her right where I'd left her, barely alive. The couple? Gone, leaving no trace. They'd cleaned the cabin so thoroughly, it was like they'd never been there. The only proof of their presence was the terror they'd left behind, and the cut cables on my car. I haven't been back to that cabin since, and I don't know if I ever will. All I can do now is hope the police find them one day.